Welcome, everybody, to the Greatness Glory podcast. Today, we are exploring something most people underestimate how the spaces you live in shape your energy, mood, habits, health, and relationships. In my own work, Art of Balance, I went over different dimensions of life where different aspects of life affects us. One of them, which I included, was the environment, because environment also has a significant effect on our well-being. Our guest today is Talor Stewart, architect and founder of Conscious Home Design. He's the author of the number one best-selling book, Conscious Home Design, and also offers a certification program for architects and designers in this methodology. Taylor, welcome. What is conscious home design in your own words?
Hey, Isaac. Thanks for having me. Yeah, that's a great question because, when I say conscious home design, I tell people about what I do. They think, oh, that's interesting. But then as I start to think about it a little bit for a couple seconds longer, they're like, well, what is that? What does that actually mean? And so sometimes the mind goes to alternative building styles or different, alternative materials like straw bale or something eco-friendly, energy efficient, like green design. Other times people are thinking it's some sort of, methodology from the Far East, like feng shui or some sort of Asian system of space planning. And it's really none of those things. Conscious home design arose after 20 years of practice and being in the industry. I found that there are some universal principles that are rooted in science that affect all people about the mind-body environment connection. And so as an architect, someone who shapes space and wants everyone to live happily ever after, it was obvious to me that I wanted to help people in a way that went beyond or deeper than personal taste or design choice or aesthetic or style. If I'm working with the client, of course they're going to get the design style that they want. But before we explore, what colors you want and what sort of surface materials you want and what type of flooring, we want to make sure that the space itself actually fits the lifestyle you want to have. Because, for example, as a parallel, it doesn't do you any good to buy the most beautiful, expensive, high value shoes if they're 2 sizes too small or 2 sizes too big. It's like they need to fit you to get the performance and the function. And so first, it's about understanding who you are so that we can create the right fit architecturally. And then we make sure that you get, the aesthetic appeal that you want. It's very often that it's backwards. People will focus on the beauty of it without, and they'll overlook some of the actual function of the form. So conscious home design arose because I saw a lot of what I would call unconscious design, and it may be nice to look at, it may have that wow factor, but it might be better as a museum or better, it looks good in a magazine, but you wouldn't really want to live there. It certainly has a lot of friction points in day-to-day flow. So conscious home design is really about helping you have the best of both.
Yeah, originally I thought, actually, just like you mentioned, that this has something to do with those kind of feng shui stuff. And because I also study a lot of the ancient sciences, like especially Indian sciences. I don't know if you're familiar with the science of Vastu, the way
Yes.
you should be, obviously, yeah. I thought it's related to that. So what motivated you to start this whole thing and come up with this idea? Was it a specific moment or things that you noticed with the clients?
Sure. I mean, I always knew that I was going to write a book, even when I was in college. I just didn't realize that it was going to take me 20 years before I published it. Like if you had talked to my 25-year-old self and said, what's your timeline for your career trajectory and what will look these milestones that I had sort of envisioned for myself, life turned out differently. But the truth is, it took 2 decades of experience for for everything to really gel and condense all the swirling thoughts and ideas that I had. When I was sitting down to write the book, I had a 50-page Google Doc of every brainstorm and note and citation and link to some scientific study and, all these different concepts that I had running down the list. And I had been looking at that for about 3 months going, how am I going to make sense of this? How am I going to organize and order this? It's way too much. My goal is not to write a book for young architecture students. I'm not trying to teach other people how to be architects. I'm just trying to give them the real essence so they're aware of it, so they can make either little shifts on their own in their space, because most people will never hire an architect, but I still want people that are just doing the best they can with the walls they have to be able to put some science to work for them. So I really wanted to just focus in on what it's almost like scientific first principles.
Right.
So things that are universally applicable. And so that's really what happened is I talked to my editor and about my challenge, and she said, take every unique concept or idea or talking point that you have and put it on a 3x5 index card and then lay them all out on a desk and see if you can, or a table, and see if you can arrange them into a natural storyline, an arc, a sequence that makes sense. And so I did that. And, I looked at it, I was like, oh my goodness, this thing's going to be 42 chapters long. Nobody's going to read that. It's too boring, And so, I worked very diligently to condense it down to 12 chapters that someone could read the whole thing in an hour, and so it was very accessible. And to do that, Mark Twain was joking. He wrote a letter to a friend and he started off saying, hey, I would have wrote a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time, because editing and condensing it and to simplify a message takes a lot of work. And so I did that. I put in the work and I created something that was basically a very simple outline and methodology that's like a formula. If you follow this, that statistically people will live longer, happier lives. And it doesn't matter where you are on earth. It doesn't matter if you have a huge home or if you have a very modest home. It doesn't matter what style it is or what kind, whether it's built out of concrete block, or whether it's built out of wood, none of that matters. So it's pretty much globally, universally applicable. So that's really how it started was me just wanting to create value for people. So in America, the founding fathers wrote in the Declaration of Independence that they see it as self-evident that all people are endowed with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And so, life, I think we can in large part turn to the doctors in the medical profession for helping us live longer. And for liberty, that's the domain of the judicial system. Lawyers and judges and politicians, create the framework, the legal framework within society can operate. But the pursuit of happiness, that's sort of haphazard. It's really left up to chance. Hey, you go figure it out. It's almost like a free for all. They just drop you into life and you got to find your bliss, find your joy. But we spend so much of our time in our homes, in buildings, but primarily in our homes. People are spending, half of their lives in their home. And it really influences us. Environment plays a factor. And so it's really the domain of architects to help facilitate the pursuit of happiness, because we're more than just animals. You can help us. We can survive if you give us shelter and a place to sleep and eat and bathe, but that won't let us thrive. And so, as human beings with higher needs for love and connection and belonging, feelings of self-improvement and personal development and growth, feelings of creative expression, the ability to, these are higher needs that we have. And without some percentage of our life focused on our higher needs, we're just living a monotonous robotic life. It's hard. It can be hardly called a life at all. We all want to stretch into our potential a little bit. We all want to feel like we have possibility in our life. And so when we design with those ends in mind, with those personal development and creative expression goals in mind, you then have the potential. You're building it into the bones of your environment, the opportunity for
Mm.
success.
Right. Nice explanation. I think I can relate to some of the things that you mentioned with your journey going through all these things.
Yeah.
So, if we get into the practicality of all this, what would you say are some common ways people could use to, better support ease, well-being, energy, and those kind of stuff by making adjustments in the home design? Maybe specifically things that people overlook.
Yeah. So I think about the Mona Lisa. It's the most famous painting in the world. And so it just turned 500 years old recently. So it's been around. By now, everyone's heard of it. And Leonardo da Vinci, it turns out that it took him more than 10 years to complete this painting. And some estimates say it was as many as 15 to 17. It's unclear exactly when the last brushstroke went on, before he died. But it was at least 10 years that he was working on it. And so this really exemplifies the truth about architecture, and that it proves that all of our amazing developments, human endeavors, whether it's art, whether it's science, whether it's technology or medicine, and any of the great things that we've achieved are in large part due to being able to control our environment. Architecture allows us to build on yesterday's achievements, because if we didn't have the ability to control our environment, you wouldn't be able to accomplish anything that took longer than a sunny afternoon to do, because as soon as the weather changed or wild animals came at night or hostile neighbor tribes or something, they'd mess everything up. So being able to control your environment through architecture and keep the rain off and keep the bugs and the animals out and secure things allows you to work on things that take time to build upon. So, I think most people have heard this 10,000 hour rule, that I think it was Seth Godin who coined it, saying, obviously it depends on the complexity of the thing you're studying, but a good average rule of thumb is if you invest 10,000 hours into something, then you pretty much have, you have expert status, in that, or mastery of that subject. And so this makes sense intuitively. We all understand that it takes, practice makes perfect is a saying we use. It takes time and effort to become good at something. But what's missing from this common sense formula is that it also takes space to be good at something. And so when we dedicate space to an activity, we give ourselves the chance to do well in that activity. And so in conscious home design, I lined up a way to do a self-assessment in your home or in your wish list. If you came to me, Isaac, and said, Talor, can you help me? I'm making a change in my home, and whether you're working with your existing home or whether you say, I want to
Mhm.
build a new home, you're upsizing, your family's growing, or whatever your lifestyle change is happening. First we do an assessment and we go through and ask these questions, because the quality of your results are determined by the quality of your inquiry. If you ask good questions, you'll get better answers and better results. And so I created a framework within conscious home design and the companion workbook, which is about taking those concepts and putting them to work for you in your own situation, to make sure we leave no stone unturned and ask the right questions. So because everyone has their list. Everyone says, "Oh, if I was designing my dream home, it's got to have X, Y, and Z." I know that everyone has a list of things that they want, but because I live in this, in this world, and I've put in, you know, tens of thousands of hours, not just 10,000 hours. I've been working at this for decades. And because it's my profession, just like if you were talking to an attorney, they're going to know more about law than you, or just if you talk to a doctor, they're going to know more about health than you. You could say, well, I've lived in my body my whole life, therefore I'm qualified to, It's like, no, you know what you like, you know what foods you like, you know how much sleep you need, you know a lot about your body, but still the doctor is going to be able to give you some good guidance. And
Yeah.
so just because you've lived in your home your whole life, I'm here to share some guidance. And so that's what it is. It's about making sure we start with your list, and I just want to ask the right questions and make sure you haven't forgotten anything, so
Yeah.
that you have the potential to say, "Oh my God, this is better than I imagined." We consult with experts so that we don't have to spend the 10,000 hours to do it ourselves. It's like if I want to optimize my body, that's why I work with a personal trainer, so they can help me get the most out of my workouts. Yes, it's like I consult with experts to accelerate my progress. So, um, are you? I know you're familiar with Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of human needs pyramid. I think most people are, but anyone who's trying to live a self-aware, personal improvement life is familiar with him. And so when I look at the average home, we're still building at the shelter kind of level, and we're not serving the higher needs. And so, I use Maslow's as a framework. I said, what would it look like if we intentionally designed homes to touch on all of the human needs? Going back to Leonardo da Vinci and dedicating space for certain activities. I could say, Isaac, I can see that you have the musical instruments on the wall back there. I'm not familiar with the exact. I don't know if it's an oud or a
Yeah, these are two Persian classical instruments. One is setar, not sitar, and the other one is tanbur. It's less known as
oh, is a
saf.
tambour. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. So, that's something that I can see that is a creative expression activity for you. And you may have more, but we want to, by putting it into your life, you're basically saying this is valuable to me, and you're giving yourself the opportunity to do that activity. And so that's really where it begins. Doing a self-assessment. You look at your home, you go through the list and say, where am I being well supported? Okay, great. Where are there gaps? Is there something in my life that's not being supported well by my environment? Is there shifts that I can make? So that's how we begin, by first the check-in, sort of the self-assessment of your situation.
I think funny thing is that I think some people could relate to this as well. I myself, I think even in my mind, I have locations for everything. And in my home, if I have the space, I would love to have specific spaces for doing specific things. Actually, it kind of makes me more focused and concentrated on what I'm doing, like a meditation room, like a office,
Yes.
or even for even minor things that people might not think about.
You're very sensitive, Isaac, and it's absolutely true. A space, there's reasons for this. And one of them, we can start just sort of at very well accepted universal science, and that's Pavlov. Pavlov did the study with the dogs where he would feed them, and every time he fed them, he would ring the bell.
Correct.
And then, it got to the point where he could ring the bell without putting food out, and the dogs would start to salivate in expectation of the food coming, and so the mind was trained for an experience, and so, just as walking into the bedroom, can produce a yawn or a sleep consciousness, or walking into the kitchen is going to produce food or hunger, eating consciousness, the living room can inspire conversation consciousness, because there's a habit associated with the activity in that space. So there's sort of a Pavlovian, our bodies get trained or habituated, our minds, again, the mind body environment connection. We get, we have an expectation associated with a certain room. And so that can help us to our advantage. So if you said, hey, I want to have a meditation room or a prayer room, then even if in the morning you wake up and or whatever time of day your routine is, that whether it's morning or evening that you carve out to have some time, you could be feeling, I'm really not in the mood. I'm just not feeling it. My heart is dry. The love and devotion's not there, or my mind is distracted. Or I'm tired. I just want to watch television or watch some funny cat videos on social media. Please, if you just step into the meditation room, the act of being in that environment helps give you a little lift and overcome some of the resistance and the friction point, by that sort of association with that space. That's at the very, sort of inner game. But I also believe, and anyone who is has taken a few steps down into the metaphysical world, that there's sort of like an energy buildup, like a battery, it takes a charge, the intention that you bring to an environment. I think this is why people go on spiritual. One of the benefits of spiritual pilgrimage is when you show up to a location where thousands of other people have gone with an intention of attunement to something bigger than them. That energy, it's almost like you can pick up on it. It's contagious. It's like it's a thought, it's a vibration that you
Yeah.
can tune in with. It's like, when you take a tuning fork and you strike it and you bring it into proximity with another tuning fork that hasn't been touched, just the waves will start to vibrate that one. And I believe that we are like tuning forks. And if we come into contact with a space or a group of people that are vibrating a certain frequency, we'll also start to modify our energetic vibration to align with the group. And so the spaces are like that. And so that's why I believe in dedicating spaces and separating certain spaces. Some spaces want connection, but some want isolation. So it's just for this specific activity. And because you can get some benefit, not just from the association with that space and the habit of that space, but also I believe there's an energetic charge that can be built up in a space. If you go there every day with this intention, then it's going to take on that that vibration somehow.
Mhm.
You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with a couple of things that you mentioned. I talk about these things actually myself also. Like first you mentioned the conditioning where you do a specific thing in a specific room. When I coach people on different practices and meditation, sometimes people ask me, can I meditate on my bed? And I would say,
You
preferably.
can, but it's very dangerous. You end up falling asleep.
Exactly. Because you're conditioned to sleep there. And I agree with you totally about that energetic aspect. For thousands of years, there have been many sciences in ancient world talking in details about the energy of the spaces, especially sacred spaces, how to make those spaces so it kind of rises your vibration, let's say the common term that is used, or puts you in that meditative state and all those kind of things. And a lot of people, for example, think a lot of temples, especially in the East and India, those are like churches. But actually, they're mostly designed as energetic spaces for recharging your energies and things like that. The other thing I wanted to ask you, because I also talk a lot about well-being and happiness, you also often mention about long-term studies about what makes people happy. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Isaac. When I was researching the book, like I said before, I wanted it rooted in science rather than opinion, rather than style preference. I wanted it in human reality, universal reality. And I came across the Harvard study of adult happiness, which started in 1938 and is still going on to this day. So here we are, 88 years in now. They studied thousands of individuals, and they're on to second and third generations now because all the original participants have passed on after this so much time. But what they did is they asked everyone, "Hey, who are you? What's your circumstances? Do you come from wealth? Do you come from modest background? Where are you going in your family, in your career, and in everything?" And then they track these individuals for their whole lives, thousands of people. And periodically they would check in with them and then sort of re-update the assessment. Okay, how are things looking? What's going on in your life? And also do the physical health assessment and everything. So what they found is that everyone had ups and downs in life, like we all do, whether they're health challenges or whether they're career changes or business successes or failures, whether they lived in a big, expensive house or whether they lived in a very modest house, some of them even with no running water or electricity. They found that while all those things matter, they found that the single biggest predictor of people's life expectancy and their happiness or the quality of their relationships with others. And so, you know, this makes sense intuitively. We all say, "Oh, of course, everything I do is for my family," and people always, when you have spare time, as soon as you've rested enough and recharged yourself, people want to go and hang out with their friends or with their family. We want interaction. And so, um, we all intuitively know this, but having the math there, having the science and the data and the numbers behind it now allow us to, instead of it to move it from a wish list item to something that is worth prioritizing. It gives us, having the math gives us permission to say, no, we have to plan for this now. It's no longer just a nice to have, it's a must have now. And so as an architect who's in charge of helping people live their best life and shaping the environment, I said, okay, how can I make sure that we're providing opportunities to enrich our relationships in the built environment, in the home? What would that look like? And so the Harvard study was very clear that relationships were certainly not limited to a romantic partnership. So if you happen to be single, you can, that's good news. You can still live a long, happy life. So I started to, I said, stop the press. I can't take this to market. I need to spend some time here and camp out, because this is the number one predictor. Like, we really have to build this in to the work. This truly is conscious home design. And so I found out that the Greeks have 7 different words for love, depending on how they show up, whether it's between parent and child, or two friends, or whether it's between a person and their community, or whether it's between lovers. They have agape and filial and storge and eros and, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a nice start, but I wanted more, and so as I started just researching all the myriad types of relationships that human beings have, I found that, and these are my own sort of categories that I came up with to sort of help me process and understand, and start to build the framework around it so I could apply it to architecture. All of our relationships are going to fall into one of 3 broad categories of giving, receiving, and reciprocal. Our giving relationships are the ones where we show up as the primary giver. And so that's the ones where we are mentoring someone or teaching someone. It's if we're parenting, children that we're raising or babysitting, looking after for someone else. It's even extends to plants and animals, our pets. Or if you have a bird feeder outside, feeding the birds, that's a giving relationship, So relationships where we show up as the primary giver. Of course, there's always a give and take in every kind of relationship. There's always an exchange, but at face value, we show up as the giving member and, and enrich, someone else or something else. Then we have our reciprocal relationships, and that's like what you and I are having right now, where 2 people show up and they just have an honest conversation about stuff. There's a give and take, there's thoughts exchanged. It's different than the giving relationship. For instance, if I was showing up to teach children, I have to put on a role model behavior. I can't let my hair down and just speak from the heart as much. There's a different energy exchange that has to happen. And so it's a different kind of behavior. Whereas when you're with your peers or colleagues, with your friends or with a partner, significant other, these are reciprocal relationships where you can let your hair down and be a little bit more yourself. And so it's a different quality of relationship. And then our receiving relationships are the ones where we are the primary, we're the beneficiary of someone else's wisdom and care. And so the relationships that we have with our coaches and teachers and mentors, with our elders and ancestors, even with our heroes or sports figures or religious spiritual figures that we can look to for inspiration or encouragement, to, again, stretch a little bit into, the next version or a better version of ourselves, just help us maximize our own inner potential. And so conscious home design, I said, well, what would it look like if the home created opportunities for all 3 kinds of relationship? We want to have giving, receiving, and reciprocal opportunities in the home, because, as we go through life, Isaac, we're going to have different proportions of different ones. In college, you're going to be, or in school years, you're going to be spending all of your time with professors and teachers, so you're going to be receiving a lot, or in any spare time, you're going to be with your friends, hanging out and doing social stuff. So it's a lot of reciprocal stuff. It's not a time where there's a lot of giving in your life. But soon after, most people start families. And if they have young children, it's just 24/7 giving, 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 giving for years, and a lot of their reciprocal relationships start falling off, taking a back burner. New parents, so often are just, please, if I could just get an hour to have an adult conversation with a friend. So as we move through life, we're going to have different proportions of the different relationships, but a well-rounded personality, an enriched life is going to have, if you look back at it, a good, healthy ratio of all of them. And what that looks like for each individual person is up to them. It's up to you to choose how much of what kind of relationships you want in your life. Some people are introverted, others are extroverted, and we all have different personal desires for the level of connection that we want. But having all three kinds of relationship in some formula or recipe or ratio that feels good to you is going to lead statistically to living a longer, happier life.
All right, nice. So, other than space for relationships, when you are designing a home from ground up, what are
Mhm.
the core human needs that you're always trying to support, regardless of style and size?
Yeah. So in the workbook, we do the core values exercise. It's a worksheet where, I ask, what's important to you? And this is very conceptual. Like one person may say, I want fun, freedom, justice. Another person, they may say, well,
Mm.
I want security, stability, and equality. So whatever these core values are, that is something to identify. And then, obviously the relationships, doing an assessment of the relationships. Do I have opportunities for giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships in my home? And finding out, where your strengths are and where there may be some gaps that you could
Mm.
support some more. And then there's the Maslow's, right, that I touched on. So your creative needs. And so I boil it down to 9 essential spaces that we want to,
Mm.
ideally in a perfect world, we're supporting 9 specific activities
Are these
in your
like
life.
minimum 9 spaces that you need, and there are other things like you mentioned because it's for different people different?
No, I mean 9 is pretty much is good enough for is universal, for anyone. I mean, for instance, I'm a very creative person. I have many interests, and so, in my perfect world, I have, a music studio, but I also have an art studio. And then I also have a wood shop, and I also have all these different things. So I have tried my hand at many different creative pursuits. And so, there's room for many things, but conscious home design says, at the minimum, let's just focus on one creative space. Choose one, because if you have the opportunity to just at least do one passion, one thing, one creative thing that makes you, that sort of keeps the spark of happiness and joy alive for you in life, something you're interested in that feeds you when you do this activity, that's enough, right? That's sort of the minimum. The 9 essential spaces, it doesn't necessarily require that you need more space, right? You don't
Mm.
have to be rich and have to have a 5,000 square foot home to get 9 essential spaces. We can do it in a small 600 square foot home if it's well designed, if it's sensitively put together. It's the way we arrange the space, the way we dedicate space and shape that. So, it is, I would say, for 90% of homes out there, it's possible if they were planned for it. 90% of the homes that people are living in have enough space to support the 9 essential activities. But sadly, 90% of them aren't arranged that way, and so because the world is not building according to the conscious home design methodology. And it's sort of ironic because, my critics will say when when I show conscious home design or the people that have, I've got, 50 reviews on Amazon for my book. And most of them are 5-star reviews, but there's always one or two people that are just grumpy and they want to tell you how terrible you are. So I read the trolls too. I read it's feedback, it's data, right? It's like, okay, I didn't meet their expectations. I wanted what they wanted. And so my critics would be like, oh, this is obvious. And it's like, yes, it is obvious. I know. I can't believe I'm still having to teach about it because it's obvious to everyone, except we're still not building that way. It's
Yeah.
like, so I still have to show up and do the work because until the world does this just as the standard, like right now, we're still building houses the way we did in the 1900s. The technology has changed. We have smart homes. The thermostat is connected to your cell phone. So the house knows when you're coming home and it knows to adjust the temperature so that it's comfortable when you get home. They're very energy efficient. Not everyone's home does that, but we have the technology to do that now. And styles change. In the 90s, everyone was painting their walls beige with white trim. Now everyone's painting their walls gray, with white trim. It's like styles change and technology has changed, but we're still building homes with this, bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen,
Mm.
family room. It's still the same old house that we were building, 100 years ago. And so I'm trying to bring architecture into the 21st century because we have learned so much about the science of human behavior and human potential and the science of human excellence. And the other sciences have made huge progress, but architecture is still stuck in technology or style evolutions. They haven't incorporated what we know, like the Harvard Happiness Study, or even
Mm.
Maslow's, into the framework. And so architects should not be living in a bubble, in a design bubble. They should be living in a well-connected discipline because, again, going back to the pursuit of happiness, that I think architects largely, that's their domain, helping people with the pursuit of happiness, helping me support you live your best life in the home. Because when you're able to shape your home, you're able to take control of your future. You're able to shape your destiny, shape your home, shape your destiny.
Mhm. Just a funny thing comes to my mind. I have an architect friend. We always, when we go for a walk or something, he looks at some of these homes and he loves the modern designs. And you could
Sure.
say that it's probably obvious that I like some of those more classical, like, ancient structures. Like, for
Yeah.
example, one thing I don't like about US is that most of the things I see, the buildings are kind of boring for me. It's like when I
Sure.
go to Europe, for example, a lot of places, if you went to, I don't know, to Vienna or Prague or somewhere, I
Right.
really love
Prague is
when I look at the
incredible.
buildings. But my
Yeah.
friend is the opposite side. And I was wondering, do you think this is something related to preference and its effect on you when you live in the environment? Or is it something universal we need to consider that would be better in helping people? Like, if I want to give you an example, some people would argue, because I also study music, that there's no such a thing as good music and bad music. And I would say I totally disagree, because there are some music that, not a subject for this discussion, but could be actually in some way really harmful when you're listening to it, or have a negative effect. So just saying, "Oh, I love this music because I like it," I wouldn't say because you like it, it's a good music. So I think music and
Sure.
architecture also are related. We could use the same example there also. Do you think this
Mhm.
is there a universal effect, or is it just based on preference?
I love this question. I love this conversation, Isaac. So, because I also am a musician, we can touch on this just for a minute because you brought it up. It's true, and you know this, but just for listeners that maybe are exploring these ideas that we know from brain waves and studying people's creative activity, whether they're having alpha waves or theta waves, getting amplified in the brain, in what sort of state, are they getting into flow state? Are they getting into agitation? Are they feeling calmer and lower heart rate? Or are they getting more, agitated? Is their heart rate, music definitely has an effect on the physical body, and again, the mind-body connection, it's a two-way street. Yeah. So, we can look and say, okay, these frequencies, these rhythms, these, vibrations elevate a certain type of brainwave or certain type of physiological experience, and maybe they make you more creative, or maybe they make it easier. This is music to study too, if you're trying to, feed the brain knowledge, or create something, music to. And other ones, maybe they make you feel sad or depressed or aggressive or angry,
Yeah.
and so you could assign a value to that and say, well, that's bad. That music is bad, and that music is good. But it has to be, and you could from sort of one objective, but I also I also agree with there's no such thing as bad music, um, because it comes down to what your goal is. If you want to feel angry about something and you put on some death metal because it feeds that, then that's good, because it's giving you what you want. Now, what you want may be harmful, for you,
Yeah.
but it's
In
just
that way,
smoking cigarettes. It's harmful, but it's good if that's your choice. If that's, you know what I mean? And so I'm optimistic. Like, I want the best for everyone, but I also believe in freedom. I want people to, have the opportunity to make bad choices.
yeah.
I believe in freedom, to make mistakes. I think that this is a better way of life. If people have freedom to make mistakes, then they can navigate, hopefully set their own GPS coordinates, in their own heart, and end up, somewhere interesting at the end of life. So, for architecture, it's the same thing, depending on what you want. What experience are you trying to create for yourself? Because some people, they want a home that people are going to look at that and they're going to envy that. They want to project power, or I'm better than, and so they can be respected, and honored. Other people, they want a home that fits right in. They don't want to stand out. They want to look like everyone else, because just being a member of the community, is their goal. Right. Some people want something that stands out, that looks totally different, but it's not because they want to be like, attract envy, or want to see like they're better, or I have better than you, or it's like a competition with their people. They just want something unique because they're unique, and they just want to do something different. They just happen to be, a different kind of person. So people have different goals with the
Yeah.
homes that they're trying to create. Conscious home design meets you where you are. It's, it doesn't matter what style your home is. Conscious home design is about giving you the spaces, whether you want to have a funky looking tree house, or whether you want something that's very modern and clean, or whether you want something that looks ancient from the old world, where you can see that every stone and every piece of wood was shaped by human hand, and the evidence of human touch is there, as opposed to looking like it was made out of a machine from a factory. Like, whatever aesthetic style, or whatever feels, gives you the feeling that you're looking for, that's fine. I just want to say, hey, do you have opportunity for love and belonging and connection? Do you have opportunity to prepare food that's nutritious for you? Do you have opportunity to pursue your creative goals, your personal development goals, any inner development stuff that you want to do? So, what it looks like on the outside is up to you. And
Mhm.
my job is just to ask the right questions to make sure that when you're planning that space, let's make sure we have the opportunities for the universal things that all humans are going to enjoy.
Right. Um, okay, it's a good way to put it. I like your example. I think if you give the example, if somebody likes to smoke, then it's good for them. Maybe that's what they want to do. Okay. Um, Going back to the topic of the effects of the environment and different places in your home on you, let's give an example of like meditation wellness room or something. What would you say one can consider, make changes and things like that to make it more conducive for that environment, for example? Because a lot of my listeners also are interested in those kind of topics. I thought it would be a good example.
Sure. Devotion shows up in a few different ways. I've worked with clients that are Jewish. I've worked with clients that are Hindus. I've worked with clients that are Christians. I've worked with clients that are atheists. There's different ways that people practice their feeling connected, and in life. A meditation space, for a person who's just practicing some sort of mindfulness, and they're not practicing a devotion to a God, that's going to take shape slightly differently than someone who has a personified aspect of the divine. Yes. I
Mhm.
fundamentally believe that it's more than a belief. It's just for me, it's a knowing. It's been proven to me very deeply. It's always been there. It's like you go through life going like, you don't think about the air. You just breathe it and get on with your life. And so for me as a kid growing up, it was like, God, yes, of course God exists. It's like the air. It's there. It supports us. You can't live without it, but we're here to live our life. And so for me as a child, I wasn't especially devotional. I was just focused on growing up and being a kid. I didn't start intentionally practicing spirituality until I was about a tween, until I was, 11, 12 years old. That's when it really woke up in me. And it's been evolving, ever since.
Mhm.
But that, sense, the sense of the divine is underneath of all physical creation. Behind it is intelligence. There's an awareness. It's not just totally unaware, unthinking
Mhm.
chaos. There is a blueprint underneath. There's an energetic or a non-physical blueprint that's intelligently created and drawn underneath everything that shows up physically. And so the mind cannot comprehend this. Um, the mind is not big enough an instrument to understand the trillions of cause effect relationships that are already in motion. And
Yeah.
so because of that, life seems random and chaotic and unfair because things are going on far outside of our comprehension. It's the wrong tool. The mind isn't, it's like showing up to a board cutting contest and you brought a hammer. It's like wrong tool. The intuition and developing, faith through meditation or prayer or surrender or chanting or whatever your techniques are is about tuning in with the intuition to get in harmony with
Mm.
the underlying blueprint of life, which is not only is that intelligent, but I also understand it to be rooted in love, And so while the universe does have a very cold and impersonal aspect to it, like we have laws of electricity, laws of gravity, and whether you're good or bad or moral or amoral, they're going to operate the same way for you, like so the universal laws are not a system of justice. They are a system of structure and order that a world can be built upon, that a galaxy, that a universe can be built upon. So there is a very universal and impersonal aspect to the blueprint and to the creator behind it. But at the same time, there's also a very personal aspect to that, to the creator that's aware of each one of us as an individual and holds for us nothing but love. And how people choose to tune in, whether they're more comfortable with a more universal aspect like harmony or love or or charity, generosity, doing good works, or where they want something or peace, you can tune into a universal quality, which is just a facet of the divine and tune in with that, or you can choose to focus on a more personal aspect, like a human individual, a saint, or a prophet, or or a Messiah, or angels, or whatever you have. So it's up to the individual to choose how their spirituality would show up for them, or not even spirituality, but you know, connection, connection to a world that's larger than themselves. And so it's not my job to tell you, hey, your prayer room needs to be this big or this color or those things. You need to tell me what prayer looks like for you. And then I can help you shape that space so that it has the right kind of, if need be, sound insulation qualities so that it's quiet in there. Maybe it has certain fresh air requirements. So make sure we have ventilation that's proper in there, or certain temperature controls. Maybe you want it to be a different temperature than other rooms in the house. Maybe you like to do it in the morning. Maybe you like to do your devotions in the evening, what time of day, and so do we want to align it in a part of the house that's going to follow the sun, so that's bright and sunny in there, or not, maybe that's a distraction, maybe you want it to be, and so that is an exploration that each individual will have,
Mhm.
with it. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's
Yeah,
highly personal.
yeah, yeah. I love when you got into the spiritual aspects of it. It resonates with what I talk about also here a
Mm,
lot. And so you say, for example, if I wanted to, let's say I'm a Hindu, I wanted to have some sort of like traditional, puja room, like Hindus
mm,
have. And I want to
mhm.
put the picture of deities there and light a candle or something. I'll come to you and I say, this is what I want. What aspects of it you would handle to just provide an example?
So I am not an interior designer or a decorator. And so what I help people with is understanding the type of activity they're going to be performing in there. How much space do you need? Is it just you in there, or are you going to be in there with other people at the same time? What's a size appropriate area to work in? What sort of paraphernalia do you have? Do you have certain things? Do you have statues, or do you have candles, or do you have, what do you have to do your things? Do you have cups and bowls? Do you have bells? Do you have incense?
Mhm.
And so what sort of storage do you need? The Sikhs, they have a book. You go to a
Yeah.
Sikh temple, it's a book, and that's front and center. It's like they're, and so, and I know in Islam, we don't do images, so we have beautiful mosaics and beautiful script calligraphy, right? And so you can choose something. It's up to you to choose, what it is. And I just want to understand, how much space do you need, both for the people, but also for the things. If you're changing different decorations throughout the year, so you have different things up. So you need, just like we have with holiday decorations, Halloween comes out and it's like people bring out the pumpkins, and Thanksgiving comes out and people bring out the turkeys, and Christmas comes out and they bring out the lights, and people have different ways for different seasons or different holidays that they decorate. And so when it's not that season, you have to have storage space for those things. And so, I just want to understand how the practice shows up for you so that I can design enough space for it. And
Mm.
and then the interior, you're going to tell me, well, I have an altar and this is the size of my altar. And so that I know that, okay, if the altar is this big and we want it to feel like it's, not too small and being dwarfed, you don't want to have a basketball court size room with a tiny little altar this big. It doesn't make any sense. Nor do you want the entire wall probably to be an altar, because you walk into this little tiny room, the size of a bathroom, and one whole wall is your altar. It can be overwhelming. Maybe that's an experience that you want. We could talk about that, and see what that feels like for you. But, conceptually, I want things to be size appropriate. And so again, it's more of the conversation. So, I may do things to suggest certain colors or certain exposures with windows and sizes and things like that. I'll help, but most of it is helping for practicality and proportion. and then it's up to you to choose, well, do you want carpet or do you want wood or tile, on the floor? Do you want chairs or do you want to be on cushions or on blankets? How do you want to, be when you're in the space? I look, again, conscious home design is about asking those quality questions. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions and I'm going to listen very carefully. And when you give me the answers, then my job is to translate that into 3 dimensions, into the built environment.
All right, cool. Moving to the next question, I heard you mention the sunny window effect. Can you
Oh,
explain what
yeah.
that is?
Yeah, because we were just talking about windows. So when I was a kid, I noticed that when a beam of sunlight would come through a window and light up a room, the family pet would always be there. Whether it was the dog or the cat, they would compete. They'd always be curled up in the sunny patch. Just me just living through life, either reading a book or playing something or doing my homework, when you're in a space for a while and maybe a cloud comes by and suddenly that beam of light goes away and suddenly the room dims, but then the cloud
Mhm.
passes and the room gets bright again.
Yeah, yeah.
Even the most beautifully decorated room is so much more welcoming and inviting when the sun is shining in. Light is life. We're attracted to it inherently, that our animals are, and so are we. And so we can use this to our advantage. If there's an activity that we're trying to encourage and support, um, you know, my grandmother always said breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And so if you want to have more than just a quick cup of coffee, in the morning, if you want to take time, to actually have a nutritious meal to fuel your body up for the day, because if you just have coffee and an energy bar, you just quick grab every morning, you can do fine for a few years, especially when the body's young. You can eat a garbage diet and it won't affect you. But as we age, over years and years and years, if you eat that way, it's going to have an impact on the body. And so, you know, having a nutritious breakfast is going to serve us well and give us more opportunity for a healthy body and a healthy life. So if we can put the kitchen, sort of in the east, so it gets morning sun that comes in, it's going to be that space is going to be more welcoming, and you're going to just naturally be drawn to go spend a few minutes in your kitchen in the morning. And that gives you opportunity to, rather than just grab a coffee and an energy bar, I'm actually going to, cook an egg, or I'm going to make a smoothie or a green drink, or do something that's a little bit more nutritious for yourself. If the space is welcoming and inviting, then it encourages you to spend 10 minutes there. Whereas if it's not inviting, you want to get out of there as fast as possible and get on with your day. So we can use this for any aspect of our life. If a hurdle that people often have a challenge is keeping up with their exercise goals. Everyone sets New Year's resolutions. Oh, I'm going to exercise now. And then, it's hard to follow through. A lot of people are setting up, a home gym in the basement, and it's like, there's no light down there, and the air quality is bad. What if you set up and so if you only have 5 minutes in the morning, man, you're just not going to go down there, or if you come home in the afternoon from work and you're tired, it's like, oh, forget it, just close the door. But if it's in a nice space where whatever you're doing for activity is right in front of a sunny window, well, it just welcomes you in, and you can just step over there for 5 minutes and do a quick, a few exercises. Why even make it a chore? It doesn't have to be like weights and machines. It could be something that you like to do. What if you like to do yoga, or what if you like to do Tai Chi or a martial arts workout? Choose a physical movement activity that you enjoy doing, maybe dance or something. So it's not a chore. And then put it in a space that's architecturally inviting. You're working with the sun, having that, connection to nature, but also that instinctual, going after the light. And so, you know, anything you want to do, whether it's your meditation space, your creative space, if you work from home, and you're just feeling, your home office is just dark and uninspiring, and you're having a hard time focusing and getting anything done, maybe change it. If you can get to a room that's sun filled, you may find yourself being more productive. You may be twice as productive in half the time just by changing your environment. So that's the sunny window effect. So I would invite anyone to think about that, about how they could put that to work for them to their advantage.
All right. Let's say if someone listening, they want to see some noticeable results in next 7 to 30 days, what would be the three top changes you would suggest they could start with?
So you know what? Everyone is living their own experience in their own reality. Your home might not have a great office. Your office might be underdeveloped because you do most of your work out of the home, for example, or or maybe you haven't really needed it because you've retired rich already. You have money, and so it's not a focus for you. And so you've got more support on your music room or your creative space or your prayer room, right? Someone else, they may have their office dialed in, but they've got nothing for a prayer space or a mindfulness room. They don't have a meditation space set up. So everyone has to do their own self-assessment to find where
Mhm.
the gaps are. And then where there's a gap, you then have to say, do I care about that? Do I want to prioritize that? Maybe they don't, or maybe they do. And so so first you do an assessment, see where things are, see where the strengths are, see where the gaps are. And then you choose from the gaps, you choose which ones you want to prioritize, and
Mhm.
then start there. That's the best thing you can do, right? So everyone has to take their own assessment. They can use the workbook for that. They can get it on my website. You can get the book, the audiobook, and the workbook as an instant digital download for like $47 at Conscious Home Design. So it's a no-brainer. It's such a small thing to pay to get a little bit more. It's a method. It's a system. It's like following a recipe. Do these things, and you give yourself a higher success rate of getting a fuller, richer life. The one thing that I would say universal for all people, anyone listening, that they can do immediately. It doesn't require rearranging an entire space and dedicating a whole thing. The low-hanging fruit is going back to the Harvard study, is the relationships. And so
Mhm.
doing the assessment in conscious home design, I say, okay, look, we want to have opportunity for giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships in the home. But what would it look like if we had opportunities for giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships in every room in the home? And so I like to use as an example a room that nobody is thinking of as a relationship building space, and that's the bathroom. The bathroom is typically a private space. It's where we go to get away, to be alone, to take care of the body, to do our business. But it's actually a very fertile ground to cultivate our sense of connection. So what that looks like is, a giving relationship in the bathroom. If you have an outside window, put a plant or two in there. Put it on the windowsill or on a shelf
Mhm.
nearby the window, or hang it from the top. It's very low maintenance. Once a week, take 3 steps from the sink with a cup of water the plants, prune off a dead thing, but you've taken one step into creating a garden, an oasis. Suddenly there's life in your bathroom. It's no longer just a dead utility space. If you don't have a window, just put in a full spectrum light bulb, and the plants can do just fine with that. Going even further, if you wanted, how about a goldfish, putting in a fish bowl in there, or a
Mhm.
betta fish? Then you can come in the morning and sprinkle a little food on top and say, hi, fish, and there's a spark of joy. Again, a spark of life there. And it makes us happy. Human beings we evolved rather in nature. We didn't evolve in buildings. And so our natural environment is the landscape. And so you could take the most beautiful, you touched on it before with your friend who's the architect who loves the modern style, and you actually like the ancient style. Those are personal choices, right? And so you can show a building to 1,000 people and you won't get the same 1,000 responses. But you can show a green landscape to 1,000 people, and whether they say they like it or not or whatever, most people will, but whatever they tell, regardless of what they tell you verbally, all 1,000 people, statistically, there may be one or two anomalies, but they're going to have calmer mind. their breath will be less shallow and more deep, and the heart rate will slow. Blood pressure drops. There's a physiological response when we see green growing things. It it signals to the body you're in your natural environment. It's safe. When we're in a building, no matter how beautiful it is, it may be aesthetically pleasing, but it doesn't send signals to the physical organism of our body that, hey, you're in your natural environment and you're safe. And so introducing plants into the home helps remind the body at an instinctual DNA level that it's in its natural habitat and it's okay to relax. And so when you put those plants in the bathroom, not only are you cultivating a giving relationship, but you're also supporting your nurturing and your rejuvenation and your calm life. And so those are giving relationships. For reciprocal relationships, oftentimes we see two sinks, a double bowl sink, so you can brush your teeth side by side with someone. If you have the space and the desire, if this is your inclination, go ahead and put in a tub that's big enough for two. That can be very romantic and calming, nice way to connect. Or just for efficiency, if you have a shower area that has two heads, instead of having to take turns, you can now shower at the same time. It's more efficient. It doesn't have to be sexy time. It's just, taking care of business, but you're in proximity with someone. And so those are opportunities for reciprocal relationships.
Mhm.
And for receiving relationships, you can take an image of someone that you know cares about you, someone that you know loves you or inspires you, even if you don't know them personally, a hero or someone, but get someone's image up there, someone that makes you feel loved, or someone that encourages you to stretch a little bit and be, your best self. And just take 3 seconds and just gaze at that and be aware of that moment, and then get on with planning your day while you're there. But those 3 seconds, how does that change the way you stand on your own 2 feet, the way you feel in your own being, and what ripple effects does that send out into the world and into your life? And how does that change if every day you felt 8% happier or 8% more connected? If you made little 2% shifts in several rooms of the house, what sort of ripple effects is that going to play out for you over years and decades? It's like the butterfly effect. The mathematician wrote, "Do the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Brazil eventually set off a tornado in Texas?" This isn't to say that all small things become big things,
Mhm.
but all big things started small. And so if you want big results in your life, start with the small things intentionally. The mathematician wrote that big results are inherently dependent on the sensitive dependence on initial conditions. And so set up the initial conditions favorably, intentionally, if you want to have chance of having the big results, rather than let it be haphazard. Because if you don't plan for it, if you let it be haphazard, the chance of success are left up to chance. So have an image of someone that inspires you on the wall. And if you say, well, I'm Catholic and my partner's Jewish, and you can't agree, you both don't want a picture of Jesus up there, or you're Muslim and you don't want to have an image of Muhammad or God, up there, then have a quote, have something, an inspiring quote or a passage or a phrase that's less prominent, but you can look at that and just repeat what it is, like an affirmation. Find a way that works for you. Install giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships in your home, and then go through every room and say what opportunities are. That's the low hanging fruit. That's if everyone does that. Just putting a picture of your hero or your mentor up isn't really going to change your life. But if you put it up intentionally and you put your
Mhm.
mind on it when you do it, and you make an effort every day for just
Mhm.
2 seconds to do it, that's the alchemy. That's what supercharges it and gives you the benefits. Like when I'm working out at the gym, my personal trainer says, do not exercise mindlessly. He says, don't let your mind wander when you're working out. He says, if you're working out your bicep, put your mental attention and focus on the bicep. You get so much better results with,
Exactly.
where the attention goes. And it's the same thing in our life, in our relationships. When you put your mind and your attention there, that's what supercharges the experience. We build it. So that's conscious home design.
Nice. Yeah. I love the part about the intention. I think it's really
Mhm,
important.
mhm,
I think That's all of the questions I had. Is there something else you like to talk about on what you do?
That's the big takeaway that I want everyone to walk away from is it's the mindfulness, the intention about what you're doing. It's the relationships, do a self-assessment in your own home, even if you're just renting an apartment. It doesn't require you to repaint or do anything. Just make sure you have the opportunities for relationships. If someone does want to, build a new home or they're upsizing or they're downsizing, I work all over the country and I consult internationally. So, visit my website, conscioushomdesign.com, get a copy of the book or fill out the contact me form and go ahead and pick my brain, privately if you want a consultation and see what we can do. I'm happy to help and really honored that you had me on the show, Isaac. I really, this is my work, this is my life's work. So I'm happy to share it with people because I know that when people do this work, it has impact, beneficial impact for people. And that's the whole point, is just helping people live their best life. So thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. The honor is mine. And I'll put your contact information and websites in the podcast descriptions for anybody who wants to reach you. And once again, thank you so much. Okay.